Which is better, video games or school? That's a loaded question. It's extremely unfair. Let's narrow the scope of the question itself. Which is better at teaching you something? A video game or a teacher in a classroom? Weirdly, video games still come out on top, and that still seems like the comparison is being framed very unfairly. So what even is a video game? Well, it's a series of tests of skill. The game teaches you the skills and then it tests you on it. What is a class? It's a series of tests of skill. Teacher teaches you the skills, tests you on them. Okay, so why are games so much better at this? You know what? We're getting ahead of ourselves. How are games so much better at this? We're still getting ahead of ourselves. Who the hell am I to tell you that video games are better at this? You shouldn't just trust me by default, so... Hi, my name's Gatsby. My real name is Jesse Snyder. I grew up playing video games, and even went so far as to make a couple of them in my spare time as a child. So obviously, I did the rational thing, and I abandoned that dream in favor of becoming a teacher instead. Neither of these careers really worked out for me, and as it turned out, the most satisfying work I've ever done has been as an operations specialist for a games industry startup. But over the course of my strange and unusual life, I came to find out that there's a lot of overlap between these two fields of study. Game design and instructional design are very similar. Why? What is it that they have in common? Violence! Alright, so here I'm mostly speaking figuratively. Let me explain. So let's say you've got this brain, and this brain has these holes in it. The holes are questions, places where knowledge gaps exist that your brain is curious about the answers to those questions. So it doesn't like having those holes, and whenever it gets the chance, it's going to try to come up with an answer to each of these questions, even if it doesn't have enough information to come up with a correct answer. But by the time the correct answer comes along, it's a little too late. Your misconception has become a belief, and your brain is going to try to defend those things because you can't just introduce the new information now because it's got nowhere to go. What was supposed to be just an informative action has become an argumentative one. And sometimes, in order to deliver the truth to the mind, you first have to destroy the lie that lives there. And this is where a lot of student resistance to instruction comes from. It feels like your teacher is being aggressive, and the act of instruction can sometimes feel like harassment, because ultimately your brain thinks it's perfectly fine where it is. As a result, the fields of both instructional design and game design wind up being these sort of cognitive martial arts of how to fight the person that you're teaching so that you can get them the damn information. A lot of the moves used across these two martial arts are very similar. In fact, the amount of overlap is honestly kind of staggering considering that they don't really reference each other. You don't ever see game designers really quoting Bloom or Vygotsky or Piaget, but a lot of the different techniques that they're talking about are the same techniques. They essentially arrived at the same conclusions independently of one another, which even further validates just how true and helpful these strategies are. But the longer I've watched education, the more it seems like a lot of these strategies are being cast aside or undermined in some way, despite having more than proven themselves on the battlefield. So what the hell is going on? I want to explain my findings and my opinions by reflecting more closely on a game that I was playing while I was in college, The Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess. Now, it wouldn't be a Zelda game if we didn't have a super important big old triangle, so I'm going to try to structure this conversation around Bloom's taxonomy. It's a pyramid that ranks modes of thinking from lower order to higher order. And as we go along, I'm going to pair each of these things to a common complaint you might receive from a student whenever they're experiencing resistance to instruction. And if all goes well, I'm also going to align these things with different important moments in the first couple of hours of The Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess. It's something I've been working on for a couple months now, and it's been a really huge undertaking. What you're watching right now is just sort of a rough draft of the opening statement. So if this is something that you're interested in hearing more about, let me know. I might continue to put more rough draft stuff out on my TikTok while I continue to work on the actual, polished version that's going to go on YouTube. All right, so what is The Legend of Zelda, and what the hell does it have anything to do with teaching? My name is Gatsby, and I've been comparing game design to instructional design for the past couple of months, and I'm going to use the Zelda games to explain some of this. So traditionally, these have been fantasy adventure games with a dash of RPG elements into the mix. I say a dash because when you throw a real handful of RPG elements in there, it feels a little bit more like you're playing a math game. This isn't exactly what Zelda is about. So what do you do in a Zelda game? Well, you play as Link. Link is the hero of the story. He's a young man who wears a green or sometimes blue outfit to start with, has a sword and a shield, collects various artifacts of tremendous power, explores the world, delves dungeons, solves puzzles, and kills bad guys. He's Peter Pan. He's a heterosexual Peter Pan. Not every Zelda game starts the same way, but a lot of the ones that I grew up with start on a dark and stormy night. You've got Link to the Past, you've got Link's Awakening, you've got Ocarina of Time. You know, not all of them are like this. Wind Waker starts in your peaceful little island village just before things go bad, and then in the very original Zelda, you're basically thrown into a canyon with zero context and no weapons, only for an old man who lives in a cave to be like, yo, you don't even have a knife? What's going on? For years, Twilight Princess was my favorite Zelda game. And I didn't even know a lot of people don't like this one. But I guess I get it, considering it starts with a mandatory goat herding minigame. I mean, imagine it's your first Zelda game, and if you've seen all the screenshots and the magazine ads, you know what Link's supposed to look like. It's not a weird farm boy. The thing is that the opening of any video game is actually going to be the very first part of the game's instructional material. It's not going to assume you already know how to play the game that you've never touched. And while kids do like playing games, they kind of hate learning the rules of those games. Think about it like this. When I opened this video up by asking what is Zelda, people who already knew what Zelda was are the ones that stuck around to listen to the rest of the video. Not because they had any questions they need answered, but because they like hearing the answers that they already have. Whereas the people who don't know what The Legend of Zelda is, don't know that on purpose. It's not like they've completely avoided hearing those words in that order. They've gotten this far without knowing, and they're going to keep it that way. This is because whether you're a 14-year-old boy or a 40-year-old woman, you do not have infinite attention span to learn every little thing, and you make these decisions on purpose. So what if it's your job to teach somebody something they don't want to learn? Which is, by the way, the default state of most of your learners if you're a teacher. Option A here is make them listen, which you couldn't come up with a stupider answer to this question if you tried. I can't make a person listen any more than I can make them do a backflip. Your second option is to give the student a choice between listening and doing something worse. This is closer to the right answer because illusion of choice is honestly how you are most frequently able to manipulate your students into doing the thing that you have to somehow make them do. The problem is students are defiant, not stupid. So they will actively choose the thing that you think that they won't want to choose so that they can win. Option 3 is just talk faster, which is so stupid it works, I swear. It's abusing their short little attention span so that you can pop off with some relevant information before they even realize they're listening to you. Now, obviously you can't do that the whole time. You know, we can't all be Busta Rhymes. So instead we're going to use this thing called the segmenting principle, which all of my teacher colleagues refer to as chunking, because they're disgusting. But this is whenever you break a complex concept down into smaller, more teachable bites. Now, if this doesn't work, the problem isn't that you're not talking fast enough, it's that you're teaching at all. They know teaching when they see it and they don't like it. Studies have shown that teaching, disguised as other activities like games and just casual conversations, it's just more successful for some reason. I don't make the rules. But again, they're feral, not stupid. So, you know, once they start to catch on that this little game of yours is actually a part of the lesson, you've got to drop the topic and move on. This is called spiraling, and it's how concepts are periodically shuffled back in to be reinforced later. Speaking of which, if you're thinking about scrolling by, let's talk about Zelda some more. A lot of people, including myself, whenever they played that goat herding minigame, went, this isn't Zelda. This isn't what a Zelda game's supposed to be. Let me be Link. But, you know, you don't start as Link at the end of the story. You don't start as the crazy, awesome adventurer. You work your way up to that, even if you don't usually start as a goat-herding farm boy. But, you know, it is what it is. This is how the game starts, and it starts this way on purpose. So let's just go ahead and dissect it as if it were the very first assignment you had in a class. It's got specific learning targets. It's going to assess your cognitive stamina, your basic motor functions, your ability to perform trial and error, your tolerance of the unknown, and a secret fifth thing that we'll come back to later. When you're in college to become a teacher, activities in the classroom are typically either instruction or assessment, but then you teach and find out a lot of times the line between these two things is real blurry, and it's definitely that way in a video game. Because this may be a lesson, but it's also a test. Twilight Princess says, so you want to be a hero, kid? Well, not if you can't herd some goats. Now, this secret fifth thing, this is the actual purpose of this tutorial. And it's what's getting chunked up and spiraled out throughout the game so that you can fully understand it by the time you need it. It's mounted combat. This is the first Zelda game that's going to have other enemies on mounts on the field coming at you when you're riding your horse. So It's trying to let you know in advance that you can defend yourself while on horseback. And it's doing that in such irrelevant ways so that it feels more like it was your idea once the moment finally arrives. If it was your idea all along, then you're not going to shut it out because it came from your goofy ass teacher. So we've seen that these strategies can work in the classroom, and we've seen that they do work in video games. So what's causing them to not work in the classroom? Every time I've ever told somebody I used to teach middle school, they've always been like, oh my God, I couldn't do it. I bet those kids were awful. The kids weren't the problem. The problem stems from when the adults in control of the situation forget the science behind what we're doing. Let's say I'm using stealth instruction, which means my lesson now looks like a game. And from the outside looking in, it looks like I'm just playing games with my kids instead of teaching them. Remember that this is the point. And then a parent catches wind of this and turns their nose up at it for literally no reason because it doesn't affect them in any way, but wants to complain to the principal about the things that I'm doing in my classroom that I have authority over because I went to school to be a teacher and they didn't. Ultimately, no one actually did anything wrong in this scenario though, because I was teaching in accordance with the science of learning and the parent was just being overprotective and underinformed, which is kind of par for the course. It's really not that big of a deal. Things like this usually blow over when your admin remembers to back the pedagogy and not to just kowtow to the angry Karen in the room. But guess which thing happens more often in schools in America? And who now can't use proven strategies because they look bad? This is Ron. Some of you might know Ron.
Hi there. Is there a project you're working on? I know more than you.
Ron doesn't seem like he's playing around. If we assume Ron is being serious, then we can assume Ron knows what he's talking about, even if we don't know anything else about him. This, on the other hand, is Michael.
I love inside jokes. Love to be a part of one someday.
Michael might be joking here, but if you know anything about him, you know he's not. There is a joke here, but it's written by the writers, about the character. It's just one of the many things he says to clue the audience in. While he may have a surface level knowledge of a lot of things,
I understand nothing.
So what's the difference between knowledge and understanding? Well, one way to think about it is what versus why. You can know that a tomato is a fruit without having ever tasted one, but you need a deeper understanding of what tomatoes are to know why it doesn't go in a fruit salad. Now, do you have to eat a tomato to understand that? No, somebody else could explain it to you, but you have to trust that they've eaten a tomato. And if they haven't, you have to trust that they have the chemical or culinary understanding to explain this, but that means somebody else in this chain must have explained it to them, which means now to trust them, you have to trust that whoever they trust is trustworthy. And if you're starting to feel like your brain is melting, congratulations, you're beginning to understand what it feels like to be a teacher. Hi, my name is Gatsby, and this video isn't actually about Ron Swanson or Michael Scott. It's about The Legend of Zelda and the state of education. In the last video, we talked about knowledge, surface level facts that you really only have to remember in order to demonstrate that you learned them. But as we've discussed, in order to demonstrate understanding of something, you either need first-hand experience with the thing, or someone else you can trust well enough to convey their experience. By default, there's no inherent reason for a student to distrust a teacher. I can feel you warming up your keyboard fingers, so slow down. I personally do hold a lot of deep distrust for teachers, and it's a bias I developed due to my own personal experiences with them. But when I became a teacher, I got to see a lot of those circumstances from the other side of the glass, and I now realize that not all of that shit was even the teacher's fault. Some of it's stuff that's just out of their control. But if I had never become a teacher, never gained that context, and instead had kids of my own, then you bet your ass I'd be warning my kids not to trust their teachers. And this de facto distrust can create a student who behaves like Ron when they're actually more like Michael. So how do you reach a student that doesn't trust you? How do you convey the importance of something to a student who doesn't give a shit? Some teachers tried too hard to solve this problem, but if you've been paying attention, you know there's another way out here. Why take my word for it? Fuck around and find out. Go ahead and make your tomato fruit salad. See if I care. This is called a productive struggle, when you trust the student well enough to make their own mistakes and learn from them. It's also a form of formative assessment, when a test isn't meant to decide whether a student passes or fails, but meant to help a student understand where they still need to improve. But with a test comes testing anxiety. If your student's anxious, they're not at their best, and if they're not at their best, you're not actually measuring their best. So, best way to do a formative assessment is using stealth, which we discussed in the last video. The Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess opens with this weird forced goat minigame that we've already discussed. By comparison, the very next activity feels like freedom, but it's more like an escape room. You're teased with a reward, a slingshot that you can buy from Ordon Village. But as it turns out, buying the slingshot isn't so straightforward. And until you figure out how to buy the slingshot, you're not actually allowed to leave. So how are you supposed to figure it out? Well, don't panic, but it's going to require some reading. A knowledge level instruction here would be if the game told you that you can press A next to most NPCs to read whatever they have to say. To convey understanding, you'd need to convey why it's important to read all the NPC dialogue. A stubborn pseudo-expert isn't going to want to hear that. If they don't want to read dialogue, then they're not going to read dialogue. And without that dialogue, they're missing vital clues on what they're supposed to do. Which is why Twilight Princess never bothers to try to explain the importance of reading the dialogue. It's better to let the player bang their head on the wall for a while until they finally discover, seemingly on their own, the thing you were trying to tell them all along. But video games are basically magic. They can teach you something through direct experience by taking you places you can't go in real life. I can show my students photos of the Apollo moon landing sites all day, but unless I have a magic school bus, I can't give them direct experience with those things. Which brings us back to this phenomenon of people increasingly distrusting experts. Let's say I'm teaching an economics class and I'm talking about inflation. I have a student who says, my dad says inflation's not real. It doesn't matter if I have the best lesson in the world. Anything I do to correct this child now comes off as a challenge to the dad. The dad already doesn't trust experts, or else he wouldn't erroneously believe that inflation isn't fucking real. So he complains to the principal, who values parent opinion more than educational integrity, and then tells me I can't talk about this subject because it's too controversial. None of this happens in Twilight Princess because once I buy the slingshot, I don't have to take it home to dad and explain to dad the importance of reading. Dad's lack of understanding should have never been a threat to my education, but now I'm having to take the slingshot back and say, sorry, my dad says listening for comprehension is woke. Which of these things is more like a video game? A movie? Or a book? Alright, which of these things is more interactive? A movie or a book? Yes, the answer is book. Now you might be confused, books aren't interactive at all. Yeah, they are. They're at least as interactive as movies because you've got to pay attention for them to work. Looking is something you can do passively, but really paying attention is something you've got to do actively. But I still argue that books are more interactive because most of the production of a movie is done by a team of people. With a book, you're doing all of that in your head. So if that's the case, can learning be done passively? You might say, yeah, it can be done passively. Teaching is something that's done to you. And if that's you, I would love for you to show me the seam on your skull where your scalp unscrews. Here, let me speak in more universal terms. Can you eat pizza passively? I mean, can you really be fed pizza without chewing it up on your own? I mean, if we've liquefied a slice of pizza so that I can pour it down your throat, I would argue it's not pizza anymore. No, to eat pizza, you have to actively chew and swallow pizza. That's how it works. I can't unscrew your scalp and pour learning into your head. But in the last teaching job I worked in, the parents and principals more often than not expected me to chew their pizza for them. Hi there, my name is Gatsby, and I'm writing a video essay comparing instructional design to game design. I'm also developing this 3D mind mapping tool to help me outline this essay, and if you're interested in getting that tool for yourself, it's called BrainMess, and there's not a page up yet for wishlisting, but when there is, you'll be the first to know as long as you follow me here. Now, we've already discussed a lot of the similarities. Right now, I really want to focus on the major key differences. You may have thought when I first started comparing these things, well, this is just an unfair fight. School's never going to be a video game. I want to play a video game. Yeah. You're also not being government mandated to play a video game. Remember the last popular game you tried but just didn't really like? Now imagine that when you tried to quit, you were told, no, buddy, you've got to keep playing that every day until you either beat the game or you're old enough to vote. I don't care if it's game of the year. You'd be pissed. Hell, you might even refuse to play the game until you turn 18 just out of spite. This is called opt-out, and whenever I was going to school to become a teacher, I was told this was the biggest problem I would ever face. Now, if you're my age and had a similar school experience to me, you may have reacted to that the same way I did when I first heard about it, which is to say, this doesn't sound like my problem. If you're a student and you're refusing to do your work, then you're going to get zeros for that work, which is going to impact your grade. You're going to fail. You're going to possibly have to repeat the grade. Right? Right? See, nobody bothered to give me the missing piece of this puzzle, and it wasn't until I actually started teaching that I realized, oh, students in school today don't face consequences the same way I did. Without any motivation to do so, the student has no reason to participate in the learning process, and without their participation, the learning process doesn't happen. Do kids in school today have it too easy? First of all, if you're a kid in school today, hey, I'm not trying to start a fight. We both know you'd win. But, before you go defending yourself, you're not actually qualified to answer the question. A lot of the punishments I would have faced in school for not doing my work are now things as a teacher I'm not allowed to do. And before you go crying boomer at me, I am not asking to be able to hit kids. I don't need to hit kids. I've got a decent sense of self-control and a strong imagination. But without any intrinsic or internalized motivation to do something, Kid's not going to do it, not unless you can provide an extrinsic or external motivation to replace that. I'm used to something like defiance meriting a negative motivator or a punishment. For example, we previously talked about how if you refuse to do your work, that's obviously going to damage your grade. But in the past, I've been told I can't give a kid a 0 for not doing an assignment, because then I'm giving them an academic consequence for a behavioral issue. So what other options do I have? Not a lot, as it turns out. Kids don't really care about any of these things. In my experience, calling home is going to be your strongest option, because for some reason these kids really think what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. And when I run out of options for consequences and need support of my admin, they always want to know, well, what positive motivators have you tried? None, Deborah, because we're confronting opt-out. We're not trying to push the kid to perform more. We're trying to push them to perform at all. If I got a kid who's blurting slurs out every day, I need to be able to issue a consequence. I'm not going to start giving him talkies for every day that he doesn't blurt slurs at kids. That's not behavior management. That's voluntary extortion. Think about it. What happens when I run out of talkies? And you know they made me buy those out of my own pocket. I say all that because as we've gone through this video essay comparing instructional design to game design, we've been going through the stages of Bloom's taxonomy, from remembering to understanding and now application. And we can't assess the student's ability to apply their knowledge if they won't fucking do it. And you know, even when kids do complete the assignment, there's still a couple of reasons why they might fail. And you'd go through assessing that like normal. Maybe they didn't understand the direction. Maybe they have some other fundamental misunderstanding between remembering and application. Maybe they've just got good old-fashioned test anxiety. The problem is that your administrators will treat the circumstance like it's any of these things, even when it is very clear that the kid just didn't do the work. You know who doesn't have this problem? Nintendo, Shigeru Miyamoto and his wacky band of Oompa Loompas. And you might argue, well, it's like we said before. They've got intrinsic motivation. They want to play the game. They don't need additional rewards or punishments to play the game they already want to play. That's not necessarily true. Have you not ever gotten stuck on a part of a game you just really didn't want to do? What caught you past it? Because I'll tell you what Zelda Twilight Princess does, and in a lot of ways, it's a hell of a lot more sadistic than anything I would have tried. You might tell me I can't punish a kid because you're scared I'm going to humiliate them and traumatize them for life, but hey, it's not like I turned them into a dog. You see, instead of scaring the player with a consequence that they haven't yet faced, or rewarding the player with a benefit that they haven't yet earned, the game instead takes something that you've thus far taken for granted and takes it away from you and says, you can have it back when you're done doing the thing. So imagine you're in school and I'm your teacher. I've got a bunch of simple questions for you. You've been able to answer them. Things are going well until I introduce the complex questions and you say, Mr. Snyder, I don't know that. This is where sometimes it feels like we're speaking two different languages, because if I'm asking you like an essay question, I know you don't know the answer. I'm asking what you think. You can do that, right? You can think, inference, give me an educated guess. Someone always suggests I'm asking too much. Oh, Mr. Snyder, it's not that deep. And you know what? Sure. If I asked you to give me 5 paragraphs on whether or not a hot dog was a sandwich, I would understand your frustration, but it's not what I asked, and it is that deep. The question isn't testing the depth of the topic. It's testing your ability to navigate the depth of the topic. And if you tell me the pool's not that deep, all you're telling me is that you can't swim. Hi, my name's Gatsby, and we've been comparing instructional design to game design by focusing on The Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess. Nothing in the very first hallway of the Forest Temple is new. Every one of these enemies or mechanics are things that you've already been introduced to independently. You've seen moss that you could climb before, but you've never seen it with a spider on it. Now the game could interrupt you and say, Link, you'd better not climb that moss until you take care of the spider, but it doesn't. There's no way for the game to prepare you for every possible combination of threats. Instead, it's relying on you to understand these things enough that when you see them in a room together, you can anticipate what might happen. And if you don't correctly infer what might happen to you, then you're going to get hurt, because consequences are a form of communication too. See, if we're comparing the first few hours of Zelda to Bloom's taxonomy, then once we've reached the first half of the Forest Temple, we're solidly in the analysis stage. We're not being introduced to new mechanics or items for the most part. We're not being asked to demonstrate understanding of what those existing mechanics are and what they're for. And while we are applying those mechanics and skills to problems that we encounter, we're no longer being told specifically what the problem is and what the problem needs. Instead, the game is giving us problems without context. So to solve each one, we're going to have to actually dive in and figure out what the problem really is. Now, this makes plenty of sense to me because I'm a teacher. This is just escalation up the pyramid of Bloom's taxonomy, but I understand how for some this can feel like you've been just thrown to the wolves. One minute the game's holding your hand, and the very next minute there is no hand. There's only one pair of footprints in the sand. What the shit, Jesus? But much like that little parable, you're not actually as alone as you feel right here. The game hasn't left you yet. Not completely. Instead, it's just slowly taking off the training wheels, giving you more freedom, but less support. Now, this makes sense to me because I understand the zone of proximal development. Basically, if you're not a little uncomfortable, you're not learning. Now, the Zelda games are honestly kind of infamous for having the opposite problem, interjecting too frequently to hold you by the hand when you don't necessarily need it. Ocarina of Time had this fairy named Navi, who was constantly interrupting you to tell you where you were supposed to go, even if another NPC had literally already just told you where you were supposed to go. Now, in Twilight Princess, Midna feels like she's supposed to be the guiding hand, but she's not. It's these monkeys. What do I mean? Well, watch the next part of this video. Monkeys. Not as smart as humans, but much smarter than just about everything else. They can communicate their needs, unlike the average human who prefers to fall back on the old, I don't know. Think back to the last time you felt this way in school. You felt like you needed something, but you didn't know how to communicate what you needed. You've got a lot of tools at your disposal here. You could use figurative language, examples, anecdotes, or you could do like my students used to do and just give up and accuse the teacher of not helping. This is why teachers usually employ a monkey see, monkey do approach, or more specifically, I do, we do, you do. Typically, a teacher is never going to ask you to do something on your own that you can't do. You might feel overwhelmed when asked to do it on your own because you only previously did it with help, but to be honest, that discomfort isn't a bug. It's a feature. It's called the zone of proximal development, and it's where you learn the best. That said, teachers still need to provide a guiding hand along the way. It just needs to be mostly invisible. How do they do that? Well, let's see how video games do it. These are the monkeys of Ordon Woods, and they need your help. See, their leader is this red-assed baboon, and his mind has been taken over by a weird demonic parasite. For whatever reason, he locked a bunch of them up in cages and just sort of left them wherever he did it. As you explore the forest temple, you're going to recognize that you've got a couple of different options for which way to go. This is where you as the player might be tempted to whine, what do I do? Where do I go? Now, to be perfectly honest, if a teacher or NPC were to jump in and just answer your question right now, they're taking you out of the zone of proximal development. You're not demonstrating your ability to solve problems on your own, and you're not learning. So in the absence of a helicopter parent, you've really just got to explore on your own, form some observations, and come up with a plan. That said, none of us are perfect. We all get stuck sometimes, and if you find yourself at a complete loss, you might wonder to yourself, I wonder where that damn monkey went. The first monkey you save is going to keep going up to doors and just waiting until you follow it. Now, you're not obligated to follow it at all. It's a monkey. But if you do follow it, you'll find that it eventually comes to a locked door. Now, that's where the monkey's hints end, because it doesn't know what to do here. And technically, neither do you. You don't know how to open this door, but we can all make an educated guess that this big fat lock needs a big fat key. And as you continue to explore the dungeon, if you happen across a big fat key, hopefully you will think to yourself, door! Monkey, I know where this goes. This is just the act of connecting prior knowledge to new circumstances, and it's where we enter into higher order thinking, which again, we can't test if somebody's doing those steps for you. And all throughout this dungeon, the monkeys continue to be a really subtle but effective indicator of how well you're doing. Some of the bridges are out, and there's no way to cross unless you basically flying trapeze your way across a chain of rescued monkeys. So even without somebody holding you by the hand and saying, all right, bud, you've got to find all the monkeys to get to the final battle, you're being given enough information to know you got to kill spiders, get monkeys. So why doesn't this work as well in the classroom? Let me answer that question with a question. Do you believe it's a parent's job to protect their child from any and all forms of discomfort? Because in my experience, a lot of students genuinely believe it's their human right to not be uncomfortable, and a lot of parents and administrators will back them up in this, even though the administrators studied the same pedagogy and know better. The tool I've been using is called BrainMess, and you can wishlist it on Steam now. Okay, so imagine you're a student and I'm your teacher. I gave you a really complex problem to solve, but after some trial and error, you figured it out all by yourself. Yeah, science, bitch! Well, slow down, because now I'm asking you if this is the best that you can do, which is horseshit. I mean, you're all hyped up and proud of yourself, and you should be, but now it feels like I just knocked all the wind out of you. I'm gonna level with you. The part that you just did, that's called analysis, and it's one of the tiers of Bloom's taxonomy, a pyramid that goes from lower order thinking to higher order thinking. And while I see and understand how proud you are of yourself, this is literally tier 4 of 6. It's mid. Your solution is mid. That doesn't mean it's wrong or bad, but you should never settle for the first solution that you come across. If we did that, everyone would believe the first result they found in a Google search, and you'd never do something like that, would you? My name is Gatsby, and I've been writing this video essay comparing instructional design to game design, mostly by talking about The Legend of Zelda: Twilight Princess. In the first video, I asked which is better, video games or school, and a lot of people responded to that video by answering my question. Don't get me wrong, I appreciate the engagement, but this was a rhetorical question, one that I plan to answer with experience, evidence, and reasoning over the course of several videos. And a lot of the comments I got were people who clearly only watched the first one and went, Video games, next question. So if that's you, I'm going to ask you to please try not to blurt the first fucking thing that pops into your head, because you might find that given a little bit of time, you might decide to reevaluate that stance based on new information. So when we last left off, Link had begun exploring the available passages of the Forest Temple, solving the puzzles that he could solve, filing the rest under IDK WTF to revisit later. And things have been going pretty good. There is a lot of waiting for some reason. I mean, the bridges are hooked to these propellers that only turn the right way when the wind comes along. That's annoying. The spiders are basically invincible until they try to attack, but it's no big deal. You just gotta be patient and wait for the opportunity. Then there's these caterpillar things that live under the floor tiles. I'm gonna be real, these are going into the WTF pile. If floor tiles are indestructible, why can't I use one as a shield? All of this is about as far as you can get based on analysis alone. It's the pedagogical equivalent of it ain't broke, don't fix it, which is fucking stupid. Something doesn't have to be broken to be improved upon, but to improve upon something, you've got to compare it to other things, find similarities, differences, weigh your options, test the outcomes. And usually in a classroom, the teacher will start by having a student evaluate some third party. So Twilight Princess is going to show you someone who's doing everything you've already learned not to do, and make you fight that guy. This is Ook. Ook is a red-ass baboon being mind-controlled by a demonic parasite on his head. The parasite is telling Ook what to think, but since it's never bothered telling him how to think, him's a stupid. Him's dumb. First of all, the only enemies that pose any sort of threat to Link right now are the ones that hit the ground. Why isn't Ook down here? He'd have so much more range of movement, but instead he's awkwardly jumping from column to column, stopping periodically to throw whatever this Australian poop knife is. It looks like he needs both hands free to catch it when it comes back, which is a problem, because the moment he showed up, he almost fell off the goddamn thing and had to use both of his hands to save himself. And because Link's a little impatient son of a bitch, he's learned that if he spams the A button too close to anything that isn't an NPC or a door, he's gonna hit it with a full force fucking body slam that could easily rattle one of these columns. Now, if you smell what I'm stepping in, you figured out what you're supposed to do here, but there's still the possibility of you doing it completely by accident. And that's a problem because, as I've mentioned before, every fight and puzzle in a Zelda game is both a teachable moment and a test. One that's there to check your understanding of the concept before it allows you to move forward. So how's Zelda gonna make sure that you actually solve the puzzle, instead of just button mashing your way to victory? Simple, it's gonna do it the same way most Nintendo games do it. It's going to make you do it 3 times in a row. And this is interesting to me because it mirrors the language that teachers often use when setting learning objectives, like the student will identify adverbs correctly 4 out of 5 times without assistance, or something like that. So once you've beat the brakes off Boss Baby's beat red baboon butt cheeks, his mind control hat falls off and suddenly he's capable of feeling shame for his actions again. Honestly, goals. Also, it turns out the Stray and Shuriken is actually the Gale Boomerang, a throwable item possessed by the Fairy of Winds or some shit. Seriously, why did he have this? Doesn't matter, it's yours now, and like I mentioned before, there have been some areas of the dungeon where you've been successful, some areas where you've barely managed, and some areas where you were completely stumped. But you just got a new toy. And just like when new information presents itself in an argument, your first instinct should be to reevaluate those arguments with the new information in hand, see if anything changes as a result. And we're gonna do that in just a second. And now, you remember that mental folder we had, the one labeled IDK WTF? You may feel like you gave up on those, but you didn't. Not really. You just had the humility to admit you weren't ready to solve those problems with only the tools you had at your disposal at the time. And now, comparing new information with prior knowledge, your first instinct should be to revisit those challenges, even the ones you thought you'd solved. The game doesn't directly tell you to do this, but it does reward your curiosity in a variety of neat ways. You used to have to wait for the wind to push the bridges in the direction you needed to go, but fuck that, I am the wind! You used to have to wait for the big spiders to attack you before they'd lift up and show you their weak spot, but fuck that, fuck you, here's the wonder from down under! And for these worms under the floor tiles, you used to have to... Alright, I'll be honest, these guys were invincible. Whose idea was it to hide under the floor? Anyway, it was a good idea until boomerang. Now, why is this important? Remember Ordon Village from the understanding tier of Bloom's taxonomy? The productive struggle was designed in such a way that the player didn't have to be told why it was important to talk to NPCs. Through experimentation and exploration, they discovered the value of that on their own. But that was way down here in lower order thinking. Just understanding something isn't enough. What happens if down the road you discover that your current understanding of something is wrong? The Forest Temple teaches you to do the best with what you have while you can, but to be open to different strategies if and when new tools become available. Learning how to do something one way isn't mastery. Likewise, learning the best way to do something still isn't mastery, because the best way to do something is still just the best way you know how to do it right now. Take this quote: "Education should focus on teaching students how to think, not what to think." Taken at face value, yeah, I agree. But before you take anything seriously, you should find the source. Who said it? Why? And what were they trying to accomplish by saying it? See, this quote's been making the rounds attributed to Charlie Kirk. And if you know anything about Charlie Kirk, you can make a pretty reasonable inference about what to think means in his mouth. But I don't have to take that at face value either, so I dug a little deeper. And as it turns out, Charlie didn't say this. This quote comes from Margaret Mead, a feminist anthropologist, during the sexual revolution. And that's fucking hilarious. Depending on who's reading the quote and who that person thinks said it, the hypothetical what to think changes dramatically. Margaret Mead specifically criticized schools for insisting on social conformity, cultural normativity, and the notion that the American way is the best way, whereas Charlie Kirk insisted the opposite. By separating the raw words from the context, the quote is a lie by omission, intentional misinformation being used to perpetuate an ideology, the exact thing that Kirk supporters claim schools are doing. And look, schools do teach you how to think. Problem is that when you teach a kid how to think, you're also teaching them evaluation skills, which, as we have explained, requires the child to question everything, even the things that, quote, aren't broken and don't need fixing. And when they question those things correctly, sometimes their opinions change. But good fucking luck explaining that to their parents. When their kids start questioning the family's deeply held ideals, it looks to them like indoctrination, because to them, any critical thinking looks like indoctrination. Here's an example of what I mean. When I used to teach argumentative writing, students had to pick a, quote, controversial topic, pick a stance, and support their arguments with evidence. Now, there are a few topics I had to make off limits, because if I didn't, then this would happen. The student picks their topic with their stance already in mind. The student begins to research their topic and their stance, but cannot find enough factual evidence to support their stance. Eventually, the student asks if they can change their stance, because their previous stance doesn't withstand any sort of scrutiny, and they know that means they're going to lose points. I obviously allow this. So, of course, when the parent finds out that their child is now writing in favor of the thing that they are against, they want to know why the teacher is teaching the child to be pro the thing. The child explains that their previous stance wasn't supported by evidence, and the parent misinterprets that as them saying the teacher wouldn't let them pick the anti-stance, which isn't what happened at all. Just that you can't support an argument with vibes and fairy dust. The parent complains to the admin, who immediately caves into their demands, which in this case is that I allow the student to write their original essay, which I was already allowing. But if I don't now force the student to change back to their original topic, they're going to be convinced I was still refusing to allow this stance, which again, isn't what fucking happened. And so sadly, it's easier to just tell my kids that abortion as a topic is off limits, and no, I will not elaborate. So what's the Dunning-Kruger effect? Well, here's the fast version. The Dunning-Kruger effect is whenever you're too stupid to realize you're being stupid. The nicer version is that the Dunning-Kruger effect is when you see yourself as an expert of a topic that you don't really know. Take this sentiment for example. As a parent, I should be able to choose what my child is being taught. Now, there are a lot of factors that go into what your child is being taught. A lot of experts are consulted for that, like historians, child psychologists, scientists. But you know whose opinion is completely fucking irrelevant here? One child's dipshit parent with no background in pedagogy, which is the art and science of teaching. If you are a parent, understand that I'm not attacking you. It's just that I have had a lot of parents as a teacher who were attacking me on things that they didn't know a goddamn thing about. In the case of public education, who is the customer? If you said me, the parent, you'd be wrong. If you want some control, you can homeschool your child, though I wouldn't recommend it. Homeschooling right now needs quite a bit more oversight. If you said your child, you're still wrong. If this was the case, your child would have the right to quit before they turned 18 or 16 or whatever it is in your state. They're not attending voluntarily. If you said the customer is we the people, you'd be correct. Public education is an investment by the government into the people so that you can have intelligent citizens who can work and vote and maintain a proper country. It isn't fucking Burger King. You don't get a special order, and you certainly don't get to dispute facts. Or at least that's how it used to be. So why is it today that if a parent demands that an assignment be changed, a book be removed, or a consequence be reversed, that they somehow get what they want, despite all the systems in place to prevent that? Simple. The government establishes the systems, but has failed to supply the fucking money. What winds up happening is, 1, parents threaten to withdraw their kids if they don't get what they want. 2, districts will let students get less funding. 3, those districts don't magically get less problems that need funding. To protect funding, board threatens admin, who threatens teachers, whose unions suck donkey dick, and this winds up resulting in the slow and painful death of the American educational system, which is ultimately a political move to take away our brains and leave us less capable of telling a lie from the truth, so that we wind up with administrations like we have now. But hey, that's not what we're here to discuss. You know what isn't political? Video games! I'm just kidding. Video games are totally political, and if you disagree, you don't understand what political means. Hi, my name is Gatsby, and this has been a video essay comparing instructional design and game design. When I began, I asked which was better at teaching you something, a video game or a teacher in the classroom. And I got a lot of answers from people who did not bother to watch any of those videos. In each one, I went over a tier of Bloom's taxonomy. We've also been removing training wheels, because when a student has mastered something, then they can apply it to creating original solutions to real-world problems. Well, except we've been talking about The Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess, so the real world's kind of out of the question right now. We're ready for our summative assessment. Our unit was the Forest Temple. The assessment will be Twilight Parasite Dia Baba. One thing this fight has in common with school is that it encourages proactive evaluation over reactive evaluation. You might argue that preps you more for real life, but it also means that school is more punishing than a video game, which pretty much automatically means it's less effective. What do I mean by that? What we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and take a look at an assessment from those two different perspectives, one being a final exam and one being a boss fight. So in both situations, you might equate questions to attacks, your grade to your overall health. In a boss fight, your feedback is instant. You know which of your attacks hurt the enemy because you see it hurting them, you see their health go down. You know which of the enemy's attacks are hurting you because you see your own health going down. And you're able to learn early which strategies are mistakes, giving you an opportunity to reevaluate and change your strategy before the fight's even over. Not so much in an exam. Your feedback is delayed. You won't know which skills are wrong until it's too late. Your only opportunity to reevaluate is a retake, which is not always a guaranteed option available to you. Likewise, let's go back to that health component. In a boss fight, a win is a win is a win. You can win by avoiding taking any damage. You can win by the skin of your teeth with only 1 HP. All that really matters at the end of the day is whether or not you're still standing and the enemy isn't. In an exam, barely passing is basically grade point poison. Your victories are averaged together, meaning this might actually bring your grade down, not up, building the wrong impression that perfection is the goal. Finally, in a boss fight, if you fail a challenge, repeating the challenge until you succeed is the expectation. And it allows for individually paced instruction and assessment. It encourages determination, self-evaluation, stamina, pride, and it makes it impossible to be left behind because it's not like you're racing a bunch of other players. Whereas in school, if you fail a year, you've got to repeat that year, or at least until the system pities you. Instruction and assessment is paced for a group of 20 to 30 kids, not one link. There's not really time for the teacher to facilitate retakes for all their students. And so if you didn't meet the mark is now even higher because you've somehow got to make up for that penalty to your average that you experienced from just not doing as well as you could have. Now, when I was a teacher, I was frequently asked, what are you doing to make sure this student passes? And that's fucking offensive. It's not my job to make the student pass. It's the student's job to perform well enough to pass. So why was my admin up my ass to make it happen? We actually answered this question earlier. It's because the government has failed to supply the fucking money. And so now the success of a school is heavily dependent on its funding, which it gets for having high graduation rates. Their districts don't get funding if their grad rates dip, and the districts pass the buck to the admins, principals, whose jobs are threatened if they don't keep retention down, and admin in turn threatens teachers who, until they have tenure, can be fired without cause, making it difficult for them to stand up for themselves. To justify this pressure, admin would often cite a study to me. Now, they never named the study, which was good because by the time they were citing it to me in 2016 or so, the study was already outdated and wrong. It originally came from 2003, where they tried to say that retention doesn't help the student. It negatively impacts social and emotional development, and those retained students are more likely to drop out. But by 2011, well before people started quoting this study to me, essentially they changed it to retention without other interventions doesn't help. We overreacted on the social emotional impact, and other variables, likely not just the retention, are causing the dropout rates. That was even further updated in 2022, where it was explicitly stated that social promotion is not better than retention. There's a greater focus on the causes, not the symptoms, like absenteeism. And the whole point is that you really need to be intervening before intervention becomes the question. So in this instance, a study was misrepresented to me to try to justify unethical response to the pressures being pushed on admin and districts to lower their retention rates. So how is this relevant? Well, when I opened this essay, I asked which was better at teaching you something, a video game or a teacher in a classroom. And I realized later on that I failed to make a very important qualifying statement, which is we're talking about games as products, because I really think the whole problem with schools is that they're being treated as services. So I'd like to make a comparison to games as services to help you better understand what I'm talking about. If you've ever played a free-to-play game or a subscription-based game or any game that's getting live updates over time, even a game in early access, you might know what I'm talking about here. Whenever you have a game as a product, if you can't beat the game, you might try to change the game. But if you can't change the game, then you try harder to beat the game. You overcome those obstacles, you learn, and you grow. Whereas a game as a service is still mercurial. It's still up for debate as to whether or not that's how the game is supposed to be. If you can't beat the game, you try to change the game. And the service might possibly cave to your demands and change the game, which means that the goalposts are moved and the player never actually grows. And when this is applied to schools, it just sort of results in a mudslide of hopelessness where if you prove you're not ready for the next grade, there's a strong chance you're going to be forced to move up to the next grade anyway, because instead of supporting your learning process and your right to struggle with discomfort until you grow, your parents have instead instead insisted that all challenges and obstacles in your way be removed, which means you are not actually learning. Superintendents, administrators, and teachers have the pedagogical understanding to know that this is wrong and that this is never going to result in a healthy and productive learning environment, but their hands are tied because they're not going to get their funding if parents are not satisfied with what they perceive to be their customer service experience. Video games don't have this problem when they're products because the development happens behind the scenes, and no matter what an angry customer says about how they feel like the game should have been developed, they don't have the opportunity to suggest that because they don't see what the product looks like until it's out. So either they get over it and learn maybe they were wrong, or they just don't fucking play it. Without these same hurdles to overcome, video games wind up having a lot more instructional integrity than public schools in the United States. This maintains the standard that you can't beat a video game unless you've grown smarter to overcome the challenges. Whereas in the current state of public education in the United States, you can beat it just by growing older.